word. So when we talk about these poor, the poor in spirit, these are people who are searching for something. And they can either find Satan or they can find God. They can find either one. And they can find both along the way. But I just want to be clear, that the poor here are not the people who don't have money or can't buy something they want. So I think we should remember that as we go through it. And then the psalmist here, we think it's probably David because we think it's a continuation of chapter 9. Chapter 9 ended with the word Salah, and that word is kind of a continuation word instead of an ending word. So this is the only place that a chapter ends in Salah. So it's probably just a continuation of David's thoughts, but he did switch subjects, so that's why it's been pressed into separate psalms here. Probably a good idea. And then, so we think David here is discussing the punishment of evil and is trying to understand why God is not punishing evil immediately. This goes back to what all of us see every day. You can think about your life and how you progress through life and see people committing evil, and it's just like, where's God? What is he doing to this? He's not solving this problem. But this is just our humanity coming out. God has a different plan. God has a different process. God's righteousness doesn't say he has to do what you think is necessary. So it's not a questioning of God in the sense of you should get down here and do something because you're just being lazy and not doing what you need to. But it's almost a questioning of his own humanity. Why is this allowed to go on? It's the same things that are questioned today. Whatever we see as evil, and even people who are not Christians think that they see something that's evil, and they convert it into something where they think, oh, well, this is what God would want, and that's not what God tells you what he wants, and so you have to be careful about not converting your own thought process into this is what God should do because this is righteous in my sight. And we have to really focus on what's righteous in God's sight. So it's not that David doesn't think that God will punish evil, because he talks about it here in the last few verses of this, but just him walking through, and he kind of explains what an evil or unrighteous person looks like. So with that, we'll go ahead and read the first verse here, and let's talk about some things that might pop into your head about what we can learn from this. He says, "Why standest thou afar off, O Lord? Why hidest thou thyself in times of trouble?" What do you think David's doing here? What do you think we can learn from this?
Well, there's two time frames. God's time frame and our time frame. Our time frame, especially in this day and age, is one that we want it done right now.
Right.
So we don't see the benefit of God's delay.
Right.
Long suffering is a better word for it, because what we want to do might not be the best, because the trials and problems that come because of the wicked help us be more righteous or closer to God. So there are benefits that come from it as well.
Right. Yeah, when God seems like he's not doing anything, then you're probably missing something. You probably don't understand what God's purpose is, or his delay is, or the reasons that he's doing what he's doing. Just like we talked about in the Kings. One king gets punished, another one seems worse and doesn't get punished, or at least on earth he doesn't get punished. So you think, well, what's going on here? I don't understand righteous way to punish somebody, and you should be going, yeah, that's probably right. I got to go and study more. I got to figure out, as much as I can. We're never going to know God's ways, but um, at least we should struggle to know as much as we can. Something else stood out about this to me, these two questions. Anything else that you can see? This is God putting the words in for David. What he's doing is letting you know what David's mind is. He's not just, this isn't David just writing something down and getting God, can you check this off? Is this all right with you? This is David being inspired by God. Okay, I want people to understand that David had questions. David was sensitive to the fact that evil was going on, and that he was asking, why aren't you doing this? So this is clear to me to be something that God wants you to understand. God wants you to understand that these questions are not just your own or just because we live in today. These are questions that throughout time span the entire time on earth. Everyone who's ever lived has these questions. What is going on with the evil? What is going on? You told us not to be evil. Why do you let people just do whatever they want and get away with it? And it's fine, and we have to suffer. And I think he goes into that further down. Why you suffer. And we talked about that a little, but we'll talk about it more when we get lower in the chapter here.
This particular chapter, the way that it describes in like verses 2 through 10, maybe, it looks like it's describing the worst of the worst of people, the wicked, those who don't have any connection to God whatsoever.
Yeah.
There's degrees, you have Christian, and you have those who are aspiring to Christianity to some degree, who think about God and morality and that sort of thing, and then you have those who are atheists and deny God and want to fight against those who are trying to do the right thing in morals. And this particular chapter right here looks to me like it's describing those sort of the depth of a rebellion against God or a denial of God altogether.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to see that as we go through this. This chapter is describing that person who blinds themselves to the fact that there's God on purpose so that they can do whatever they want, because whatever thoughts that a man has, whatever wickedness and evil he can create in his mind, if I can do away with God, then I can do any of that I want to. I can be whoever I want to. I can be God. I become God if God doesn't exist. So, and that's hard. If you think about it, where we are today in society, if everybody's God, then what are the rules? Whatever I think. Whatever you think. Whatever you think. Everybody gets to think whatever they want, and they get to create their own rules. So, I may think I can run around killing people. You may think you can go around stealing. Whatever we think, that's okay. We might get in trouble because the laws of the land exist and somebody might find out. I think it was a little easier probably to get away with some things that we think are very bad in the Old Testament. They couldn't track you down as easily. No cameras or, fingerprints or DNA or that kind of stuff. But it doesn't make it any different. We don't think about killing probably the same as these people did, because I think that there was something to, they talk about murdering someone a lot, then there's probably with more ease. And also, when they're talking about, laying in wait for someone to kill them, it's not just kill them, do whatever, It's all the sins that we could commit. But this is what happens when a person thinks that they are God. Because there can't be nothing in charge. So you have to be in charge if there's no God, or your group has to be in charge if there's no God, or whatever. Something has to exist to be in charge to guide what we do, and it can never be stable if there's no one place to go to look for that. So in verse 2 it says, "The wicked in his pride doth persecute the poor. Let them be taken in the devices that they have imagined." What do you see here? See anything that we can learn or understand from this?
I find it interesting in the context of this thing talking about how to get to that point. And when you look at verse number 6, it talks about he had said in his heart, "I shall not be moved, for I shall never be in adversity." Verse number 11, he says, he had said in his heart, "God had forgotten. He hid his face. He will never see it." Verse number 13 says in that one, he had said in his heart, "Thou wilt not require it." The idea is that, I've been thinking about this a little bit as far as that goes, is what we think in our hearts, and the idea of self-deception is what's been a focus or something I've been thinking about. I say in my heart this sort of thing, and that's like what we all do. We think about it in respect of, this is how I see it.
Yeah.
So the wicked, he said in his heart that there's not a God that's going to require him to, there's not a God that's going to have to answer to, there's not sort of thing. But then the next level up is people say, there is a God, but I still have to direct my life. And the upper level says, there is a God, and he says, and this is what has to be done. We have to be very careful that we don't drop from God directing to a level where we say God is directing, but yet we're still directing and deceiving ourselves and believing we're okay.
Right. Yeah. You got to go through some stages to get yourself to a point where you don't believe there's a God. So, I see, I've seen some videos on YouTube about people who think they were above the law, and you think it's the same way with God. You have to convince yourself that you're a sovereign citizen or you're whatever. The laws don't apply to you. The rules don't apply to you. You are God. You are the one in charge. Whatever I think is okay. Whatever I do is okay. And there's a process you have to go through to work up to that. You have to figure out how to convince yourself. Because it's not easy, I think. We go the hardest route possible. We could look at the Bible and understand it and try to live the life of a righteous person. Or we could try to figure out how to make ourselves evil and wicked. Which is a difficult, it's not easy to make yourself evil and wicked. People, even, without some other individuals around you helping you pursue that, even, that makes it a little easier, but it's still a difficult process to work through to become wicked and evil. Especially in this way, to say, there is no God, I'm just going to block it out of my mind. Whatever I say goes. Whatever I say is the truth.
It's especially difficult for those of us who have been brought up in the church.
Yeah.
In the sense of knowing people that have had the background where they've gone all the way off and left the church and are just living in godly lives. Now, how does their conscience deal with that? You have to, I don't know, how do you shut that out and live with yourself?
Yeah, I think you're right. For those of us that are in the church or have heard the Bible or read the Bible, how do you figure out how to be evil? That's a more difficult process than doing the right thing. Not mentally, I think it's harder to be righteous, but to figure out how you can justify yourself, I think, is a really difficult thing. And we spend a lot of time trying to justify our evil works. But back to verse 2, I think one thing I saw here is the wicked in his pride doth persecute the poor. Let them be taken in the devices that they have imagined. So this goes back to the idea we discussed a few chapters ago. When you develop a plan that's evil in your mind or anyone, you first develop the plan and then you set out to complete that plan. And then you take the action to do what you wanted to do. What you've done is you haven't set up yourself to hurt someone else. Basically, this is saying you set up a device, your plan is really set up for yourself. You set up this evil plan to snare yourself in. And this is kind of the first stages of doing something evil. You set up this plan, and then you carry it out, and then over time you can figure out, well, everything I do is evil, so that God thing must not be true, because there's no way, because why would he let me do evil stuff, or whatever your excuse is. So we set this up, and I think we have to remember that the person who's doing evil, they're setting up something for themselves. They're not setting up, it's going to hurt the person they're going after, but they're really setting up a snare for themselves to become more and more wicked. And so the next stage here in verse 3 says, for the wicked boasteth in his heart's desire, and blesseth the covetous, whom the Lord abhorreth. That's a lot of bad things. So the wicked person first boasts of his heart's desire. So the thing that I want is okay. So I want money. So it's okay for me to steal it, because whatever I got to do to get money, that's what I need to do. And then, you think your covetousness of that thing, let's say money, you think that that's good. You turn it into something good in your mind because you bless it. You say, this is good. It's the same thing God says to you when you do something righteous. He blesses you. He tells you that this thing will happen if you do this. This is your blessing. We do the same thing to ourselves. If we become God, we say, oh, well, I bless that. Whatever I want, that's a blessing. If I can get money, that's a blessing. And I need to do everything possible to do that. So if that takes stealing, if that takes lying and cheating, whatever it takes, it's okay, because I bless the fact that I wanted that thing down here, which is not evil of itself. But when I see that it's bothering me, let's say, then I have to bless that thing. I have to say, that's above all. So now it's up here. Now it's the most important thing, and now you have to get to it. Whatever you covet, whatever you bless, that you covet has to be at the top, and that's why God has to be at the top, or we can't ever see the truth. And here it says, whom the Lord abhorreth. So he abhors the fact that you've made God, either yourself God or the thing that you want God. So I think that's the point here. You're working your way into evil. And it's a way of David explaining not only you're working your way into evil, but why is God not doing anything about this evil that he knows is evil? And I think he's going to tell us here. Not tell us specifically why God is not doing anything, but what he understands about God. Anybody have anything else on verse 3 there? In verse 4, it says, the wicked, through the pride of his countenance, will not seek after God. God is not in all his thoughts. What do we see there?
Does that exclude us? You look at verse 2 and 4, both of them say, the wicked.
Right.
Does that exclude this group here?
As soon as you are wicked, you're included. As soon as you do something evil, until you realize that you shouldn't do that, if you're planning, like this is talking about a purpose. As soon as you purpose in your heart, and then you set the plan, and then you carry out the plan, then you're on that side of following through to wickedness. And as soon as you can correct that, obviously that needs to be corrected, and we all fall short. But what I'm saying is that this is really talking about a person's desire and heart's direction. So if your heart's direction stays in that path, then that was when you started in wickedness. If your heart's direction is toward good and you do evil, and you see what it is and you either stop it or repent immediately, and you can continue down that path that you were on without switching directions and now saying, okay, from this point on, I think that's when, at least that's how I see it. What do you think?
Well, what came to my mind with that is we've been talking about it on Wednesday night, the divided kingdom of David and different kings, and you see those men who completely just followed after Jeroboam and the sins of Jeroboam and just kept going that way. That's the wicked ones that are just not willing to make changes. But David, he made mistakes, but he was not a wicked man because his heart was penitent. He was confronted by the truth, and he made that change. And so I think those accounts in the Old Testament right there give us an illustration of what this is talking about. There were wicked people who didn't care. They were going to do it no matter what. And then there are people who do sin, but they're not wicked people in the sense that that's not the path that they want to take. This is talking about those people who don't care.
Right.
I'm going to do what I want to do, no matter what the consequences are to me or anybody else. And, I'm in charge.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I agree with it. I guess what I caution myself, at least I caution myself in saying that I'm not on the wicked path when I do something wicked, because if my direction changes at that point, if it somehow, I don't know, goes off the rails, I caution myself to not think, oh, everything's okay. And so you're probably right. This is not talking about somebody who's on the right path and commits a sin. But I also caution myself in saying, like I've said before, somebody came up to me and said, look, I'm not on the right path. I don't know, I don't think I'm saved. Then for me, that says that person knows they're not saved. That's not when somebody says, I don't think I'm saved, that means to me, especially from my experience, my own experience, when I said that, I knew I wasn't. So it wasn't like I was on the right path. I guess what I'm cautioning is thinking you're on the right path when you've already started down the wrong path. So I think you're right. If you're on the right path, this is not what this is discussing, but this is discussing a person who has decided not to be on the right path, and they are just going down, trying to figure out. I think it's a progression though, and that's why you have to be so careful, because you start with I don't really like that rule. That's how you start. And then you go, well, it won't matter if I do that once.
We've always heard the illustration of you throw a frog in a boiling pot of water, he's going to jump out, but you put it in a pot of cold water and turn the heat up a little bit at a time and boil himself to death. That's kind of the process you're looking at here. These people, the wicked, they boil themselves to death. They're already, they're out there. We have to concern ourselves with the things that they say in the heart that is described here that we don't say, God will take care of it. I don't have to repent. I don't have to do this. Grace will take care of it. And I'm going to be okay. And, there's not anything to worry about. And that's right. You can't get to that point. We've got to be examining our lives and making adjustments and striving to grow in righteousness, being like Christ.
Yeah, my point is to something, in my own life where I sat in the pew and I was a pretty good person. I wasn't doing a ton of stuff wrong. I looked like a good person from the outside. Nobody could be convinced I wasn't, especially when I said I'm trying. But I had 2 or 3 things. I'm always going to do these things. These are my sins. I'm going to keep doing them. So that person who's like that is wasting their time. I mean, hopefully I learned something sitting in the seat, because God says you'll gain knowledge, you'll gain understanding, but you just don't do it. You're just like, well, I'm going to sin. Might as well be these 3 things or these 5 things or whatever it was. I'm going to sin somewhere. God already said I was, so what's the big deal? I can just do those 3 things all the time and not worry about them. So that's what I worry about for myself. And so when I come across like I am right now about be careful about where you're headed, and like this one step leads to the next step, leads to the next step, and then you're down the path to not being in or being in sin all the time. So that's what I'm being cautious of, I guess.
I guess a good illustration would be that study. People think that it's not obligatory to come to Bible study, so they don't come. And then it's easy, to if you miss that, then you can justify not coming to worship and engaging in study there, and then it gets easier. You might as well be conscious a little bit first, and then you get to where you can get through that before long and not even coming on a regular basis. I'll even worship. So it's progression, and they're out of the church altogether.
Yeah, I can give you a really good example of a person who's probably better than most people I know, a good person in the church, saw a lot of bad things in the church, decided, well, people in the church aren't any good, so I'm better than those people, which he probably was. So he was probably doing more right things than a lot of people in the church. Not everyone sitting in there, but the people he saw that were doing bad things, he saw them over and over do those things. And like, I want to ask for forgiveness for going up, and then 3 weeks later going up again. I did this. It's just like this person's never stopping, and these people are evil. You start to build it up in your mind. Like, oh, all these people are doing something. Everybody, and then the things you don't know, all the secrets that come out, then he started seeing that, and then he said, well, I can be more righteous if I stay home and read my Bible. And then he's like, well, I don't need to read the Bible anymore. I already know what righteousness is. And then he was like, well, what if I just drink some at home, with nobody around? Well, what if I drink in public with everybody and drink a lot? What if, you just go down this path of talking yourself into you being God, of you being righteous. And then all of a sudden you're at the other end of your life and you're thinking, you're not even thinking about it anymore. Like this chapter is saying, God is not at all in his thoughts. That's what he's saying. You just walk through life, walked yourself into God not being in your thoughts at all. So that's what scared me. I've seen it happen to several people, and even to myself to some extent for a long time, of being, of acting righteous without being righteous. In verse 4 here it says, the wicked through the pride of his countenance will not seek after God. God is not in all of his thoughts. You think you can gain out of that?
Well, you just want to look at it from the wicked side and the righteous side. Is God in all our hearts or all our thoughts? Or we got, like you said, that little corner that, well, God's not allowing that. We've done church on Sunday morning. We shake hands with everybody when we go out to work. Right. Then we, we're back in the world. But we need to keep 100% mark here in our face. Yeah. He's got it all our thoughts. First, he got it all over. Right. Well, good.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to what Rob said. Two things Rob said. Being in the Bible helps you keep God in your thoughts. If you're not in the Bible all the time, if you're not trying to discover all the time, then God becomes kind of an afterthought. If you're out in the world, I would suggest, and I've been very bad about doing it, setting a time aside where that's what you do. You read the Bible. You read it for understanding. You sit there and think about it. And then I think too, this right here is talking about the wicked progression. You go from planning an evil deed to carrying it out to thinking that it's okay, blessing what you're doing, appreciating what you're doing as if you're God, to now not even considering God. He's not even a thought anymore. So I think David's just talking about the wicked person who progresses through evil and how they get to where they are, and how he sees that God's not even in their thoughts. And then what happens? It says in verse 5, his ways are always grievous. Thy judgments are far above out of his sight. As for all his enemies, he puffeth at them. So we don't like using these kind of words, but it says his ways are always grievous. So he's walked through, converted himself into pure evil. That's what this is saying. That none of his ways are good. Like, just because you're doing some good things, every evil person does some good things just out of accident. You can't always figure out how to do the most evil thing in every situation. But I'm saying this person, doesn't matter how good their action was, they helped somebody, they did something they were supposed to, they didn't steal when they could have. Whatever you want to think of, his ways are always grievous. That's pretty tough. Once you're at that end, your ways are always grievous. I think that's one significant point of that. And then it says, thy judgments are far above out of his sight. What is he talking about there? Thy judgments are far above out of his sight. He's saying God's righteousness, God's judgment is so far out of your sight, you don't even know what God thinks anymore. It doesn't even matter. So you're always grievous. You're always unrighteous. Even when you're doing things that are okay, that God says are okay, because you have directed your heart and your mind toward evil, you're always grievous. And that you can't see what he's doing. And then the final step is because of all this, now you have to say those people who are trying to do what God says, you have to say they're crazy. You have to now start attacking them to just prove that you're right, because now you need proof on top of all the other things you've done internally and externally. Now you need proof to say, hey, I'm in the right place. I'm doing the right thing. This person's crazy if they think that's the truth. If they think that's righteous, then this person's crazy.
We all have the mindset of justifying ourselves. We have to have justification in some way. People that do horrendous things as far as killing, kids or themselves or whatever, they justify it for some reason. Okay, in their hearts and minds.
Exactly. So I hope you gained something from this today. Let's close with a prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you again, thinking about what we've talked about today, trying to understand what we can gain out of this to use in our daily lives, trying to understand that when we continue in evil, that it directs our hearts in the wrong way against you, and that if we let it go far enough, we can totally walk away from you into righteousness. Help us to focus our minds and hearts on your word every day, and help us to be concerned about what it says and understand what it says, and make sure that we take care of our minds and hearts to have understanding and knowledge, but use that in wise action every day. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.